This episode of the Get Fast podcast is brought to you by TriVelo Coaching, where we help triathletes and cyclists like you train smarter to race faster. You are joined as always by your host, former Australian Ironman Champion Gerard Donnelly, and I am Jordan Donnelly. In this episode, it is a bit of a random episode because we've been having some great conversations over the last few weeks, getting some great questions from mostly TriVelo athletes. We've spoken a lot about on the podcast how racing season is coming up. A lot of people have had a pretty funny year with training and thinking about racing, and there's a lot of questions in this period about where people are specifically at. You know, what are people aiming for, where their current ability is at the moment, where their ability can get to in the short term and long term. We've just had some really good questions and conversations with athletes around what's coming up over the next year. So we thought we'd actually take some of those questions and apply them to this podcast and inform the listeners, some information that you really find handy in terms of applying it to your own ability and what's next for you. So we're really excited to get into some of those questions. But as always, firstly, Dad, what's caught your attention in the last week?
Great question, Jord. It's probably a little bit out of date, but the finish to the Giro was incredible, and I really was so excited about talking about it last week, and I've had to hold on to all of my thoughts until this week, and of course now the Welter is on, and that's got its own highs and lows, and good rides and bad rides happening, but the Giro is what caught my attention. And who would have ever predicted that two second-tier riders in the biggest teams of Jumbo-Visma and INEOS would be challenging.
INEOS, yeah.
Sorry, what did I say?
Jumbo-Visma, which is what we're used to seeing, yep. Roglic and Van Aert and stuff. But yeah, it was somewhere.
That's right. Yeah. Vying for the Grand Tour victory, and you know, Geraint Thomas was the main rider for INEOS, and Kelderman was the main rider for Sunweb, and yet the next level riders, you know, were separated by a second or two coming into the last time trial. So there's so many things about that whole scenario that, yeah, that's what caught my eye.
Yeah, the Jai Hindley story was incredible. I personally had never heard of him until the Giro. He's been a young gung Aussie, obviously, on a pro team, and a lot of other people in the cycling world would have heard of him. But when I was watching the start of the Giro, in the first week, he was in the top 10 after the first few climbs. I thought, gee, I don't know who this Jai Hindley guy is. As an Aussie, I thought it was great that he's in the top 10. And I went and looked him up on Instagram, and he had like 3,000 followers or something on Instagram, and it just said pro team Sunweb. You know, there wasn't much information about him online. And then the second week in the hills, he was still there. And then the next minute, he was coming third. And last week, he got himself into the Maya Rosa, going into the last stage, and he had a chance to win the Tour of Italy, a Grand Tour. Pretty incredible for him. And I actually checked his Instagram after that day, and it had already blown up to about 10,000 followers on there. And I think a lot of people were going through the same experience I thought of him as well.
Yeah, and look, another Aussie from Western Australia. So the Western Australians are doing well. Ben O'Connor, he had 3 sensational days in a row. He got second on one of the hill climb stages. Then the next day, he got on the break again and won. And then the third day, which is where the GC contenders were going hammer and tong, he was away in the break solo with, you know, less than a handful of kilometres to go. And he almost pulled off a third one, except for those guys absolutely hammering. With Rowan Dennis leading the charge, he could have actually won 2 stages in a row and got second in another. So, you know, it was just an incredible performance by the 2 young Aussies, and that really caught my attention. And you know, it's almost like the changing of the guard, as we were talking about. You know, Nibali and Fulsang and all those guys just really. Just doing nothing in this tour. It's almost like the end of their career, and you're seeing a new wave of riders who are just not afraid to ride differently. And I was so intrigued by listening to David Brailsford, who was the instigator of Sky, the boring method of riding everybody into the ground so no one could attack. And you know, Sky won so many Grand Tours that way, and it was based on, you know, really good coaching and strategizing and yeah, and data and knowing your numbers and riding climbs and just riding people, into the ground. And it was such a great way to win races, but it was boring as anything. People just got so sick of it. And he was excited. Like the interview they had after the guy from INEOS won, which was
Tao Gegenhardt.
Tao Gegenhardt, which
He has a funny name, doesn't he?
that is, yep. The exciting way that he ended up winning the tour was that unpredictable, have a crack and risk everything. And it paid off dividends, and he was having a ball as the director. You could see the enjoyment in his eyes and in his comments. As the old style is boring, I think I heard him say, and this is the way of the future. And you've still got to use your numbers tactically, but not have 6 or 7 riders sitting on the front, just blowing people up one by one. Being able to have some tactics that are different and exciting, and people want to come and watch that. That's what the sport's about. Not the same old predictable style of riding. Race in, race out, and I think cycling needs to reinvent itself a bit, even though it's a hugely popular sport around the world. This is the future of how races should be, and they should be all individual one-day classics, in a grand tour. The Giro has done that for years, I think, better than the Tour de France has done. It's such a better spectacle, even though the Tour de France has got the reputation and everybody loves the Tour. But the Giro has better races because there's so many opportunities for other people to either win stages or win the Tour. And whereas the Tour de France is a very predictable, obviously the best riders do eventually win. But the Giro, it's kind of, anybody's got an opportunity, which I love. And the Welter's the same. And I think those stages of 250 to 300K stages, they're a thing of the past. You're still going to get the same result if it's a flat sprinting stage, whether you ride 250 or you ride 150. What's the point? Just trying to get riders to be on their knees by the end of 3 weeks. So I think there's a limit to what you can do to riders, and their health and well-being is kind of more important than seeing who's the best survivor at the end. You want to see the best bike rider win rather than the person who can survive the 3 weeks. So yeah, look, the other thing I want to say was Rowan Dennis's fortunes over the years have been maligned a lot. And, he's a 3-time world champion on the time trial bike. And he pulled out of a tour last year when he was riding with Bahrain Merida, stepped off the bike the day before the time trial, which he was expected to win. And he couldn't ride the time trial for nuts in that team as compared to when he won 3 titles. And it came down to the bike, and the bike fit just didn't suit him with that team and the different bikes that they were using. And you wouldn't think it'd be that important. And it's one of those things that we've talked about many times for our triathletes and for our cyclists, that even yourself, Jordy, and your brother, you can create all sorts of injuries by having a really poor setup on the bike, and you don't get the value out of the power you're pushing in the pedals if you're not sitting well to push the right power, and if you're not aerodynamic to be slippery through the air to go faster. So there's so much in that. Even from the best time trialer in the world had a setup that basically stunk, and he couldn't ride. And that's he's changed teams again, and here he is back to the best form that he's ever been in his life, and seriously rode the whole peloton off his wheel, bar the 2, Sunweb and his own rider, his own teammate. And there was a couple of stages there where he was the best rider out of the 3 of them, except he was doing all the work. And it was fantastic to see him come back. And that's kind of one of the topics that we want to talk about today is, the fortunes of athletes, whether you're a triathlete, a runner, or a cyclist, they ebb and flow. And it's how you manage all of that determines what sort of future you have or how enjoyable your sport is. And, if you're someone who's always half empty and negative, you're not going to reap the rewards of when things go well. You've got to have a better positive outlook about everything you're doing. And there's some of the things that I've witnessed firsthand as in the professional ranks. So, it's so much more prevalent as an everyday cyclist, who's just doing it as a recreational sport. Life's too serious to be down the dumps about having, periods where you're not able to train consistently, and you've got injured or you've been sick. You've got to put that in perspective and really make sure that when the opportunities come, you take them with both hands, because they can slip away very quickly, and before you know it, you're growing very old and you've missed your opportunities.
INEOS did that, didn't they? They really didn't have the Tour de France that they wanted, and they came back and made the most of the Giro.
Yeah, it's one of the points we made at the end of the tour, how shocking they went in the Tour de France and how disappointed they would have been. And we both said, look out, I bet you they make amends. They can either do one or two things and not really have much of a season in 2020 because everything's going against them. Like, it seems like everything's going against everybody in the world at the moment with COVID. But boy, did they turn that around. They won a record 8 stages. Ghana won 4 stages. They won the Tour. The last time they did that was when Froome in 2012 at the Tour de France, they won 7 stages and they won the Tour. So they've eclipsed their previous best Grand Tour performance. They won over a third of the stages in the Tour, which is what a comeback. That's not going away and crying in the corner. That's coming out and so showing people, we might not have done well there, but now look at us, which I really admire.
Yeah, 2 things really stood out to me in the Giro. One is that it reinforced the point that you always make about whether it's a one-day race or a 3-week tour. The Giro really highlights managing your effort, because almost every year we see a different top 10 in the first week and a half to the top 10 in the second week and a half, or a massive reshuffling in that top 10 order. In the Tour de France, like you said, the best riders stay at the front the whole time, and the best rider normally ends up winning, whereas always whoever's leading in the end of week 2 is generally blows up and is 6 minutes behind at the end of week 3, because it's so hard to manage your effort in those grueling stages for 3 weeks. And we saw that again on show in that final week of the Giro, where it ended up being the 2 first and second, Jai and Tao, battling it out. But even they were on their limit on certain days. And then the second point about it all was the domination of, or just how great it was to see Australia so present throughout the whole Giro. Simon Clark was in about 17 breaks. He was almost in a breakaway every single day. Rowan Demenis was one of the strongest riders, as you said, in the most important stages. 2 boys from WA, showing their guns in the hill stages, and then a chance for one of them to actually win. It's absolutely incredible.
It was, it's funny you should say that, because there was one stage, I think it was the penultimate stage, where Rowan Dennis was on the front, Ben was up the road, and Jai was on his wheel, and then they caught Ben, and so there were 4 riders left. 3 of them were Australian. That's incredible. That hasn't happened in a long time. And Simon Clark the day before, as you say, was in the break the day before, and he was in everything going, just trying to get himself up into a stage win, which you can't knock him for trying. So the cycling, the young cyclists in Australia are really performing quite well internationally, and it's really great to see.
One disappointing thing, which we won't harp on this, I just thought it was worth mentioning, was the disappointment that the commentator showed, and I agree with this. He was a British commentator, but he spoke about how on the Sunday morning, when Jai was in the pink jersey with a chance to win the stage in the last time trial, he opened up the West Australian, the newspapers in Australia, and there was not one article on it. And he's in a chance to win one of the biggest Grand Tours in the world. And there was obviously a lot of articles about the AFL Grand Final, which is you'd expect, but you'd think there'd be one article on it. And I found that really disappointing as well, that coverage. And maybe you have to knock the sport of cycling a little bit there's a bit of distrust among the public about why would you watch it when, the 2000s were full of so many cheats. Maybe they're still recovering from that. But regardless, it's a really good sport to watch now. And I wish the Australian media, not just SBS, covered it more.
I would agree with you, and but the example of the AFL with the peptide saga, that's just been dismissed. So yeah, I don't know if that's. I think it's just that it just seems like Australians don't rate cycling as a sport compared to the rest of the world, which is disappointing. I know Rupert Guinness has been a massive journalist who's well recognised worldwide as an expert journalist who can report on any event and knows all the riders back to front for the last 30 years, 40 years probably. But it just amazes me that we just don't give our guys the accolades they deserve, and it's just such a dominated media for the it's cricket and footy, and that's it. No other sports get a go.
Yeah. Well, we get into the questions for the day. We're going to fly through some questions that we think are really valuable for the listeners to hear. And the first one was something that caught my attention over the last few weeks. I've said on the podcast a few weeks ago that I'm personally riding a little bit more, and I'm experiencing the difference between riding and running, especially for triathletes. I have found that when you're on your limit, there is a difference in fatigue levels when you're running a 5-kilometer threshold effort, for example, or a 20-minute running effort, or longer endurance, compared to an endurance cycling effort. And I wanted to get your thoughts on, especially being a former elite Ironman, what it's like to hold a certain speed or wattage or power or effort on the bike, and how my theory is that you can actually hold it longer on the bike compared to what you can hold that lactate level running. So what do you think about that?
It's a great topic, and one that you and I have discussed many times with your brother as well. Look, I definitely think the effort you put in as a runner, it's a full body effort, and you're providing the momentum, whereas on a bike you're putting the effort through the pedals, and the wheels are allowing you to propel yourself forward. And I think that's the key difference between the two. It's such a grueling thing to run, where you're having to generate everything about the forward movement. So you don't get these micro fractures of recovery that you get on a bike. And, whether you're running uphill or downhill, whether you're riding uphill or downhill, they're completely different. If you're riding downhill and you're in the hardest race you've ever been, you get recovery. If you're running downhill, you still have to take each step. And it's actually an eccentric and concentric contraction up and downhill, which is worse on you as a runner. So I think people forget how much you do get to recover in a cycling rate. We're talking bike races rather than time trials, but time trials, you still got that undulation on the road where the pressure is off for fractions of a second. You don't get that in running. It's just constantly on. And if you can't keep up as a runner to the pace that's set, you just drop off to go back to the pace that you can sustain. And whether that's an 800 or a 5K or a marathon. Whereas as a cyclist, you can sit in and recover by getting 30% drafting, just by sitting in for 10 seconds. And most cyclists are well trained to do over efforts, under efforts, and just by giving yourself these micro fractures of a recovery, you're able to sustain efforts for longer because you're getting this recovery. The difference is on a climb. If the question you've asked me in general cycling, but if I said, let's see how you go on a climb is as close to running as possible, because on a climb, if you take the pressure off the pedals on a climb, your bike almost stops and the momentum's gone because of the angle of the hill. And that's similar to running. So I think hill climbing closely resembles running, but general cycling, there's so many periods where you've got recovery that you don't realize. And that's the difference. And that's why you're able to, it feels like you can sustain high intensity efforts for longer. But in fact, you're not really doing that. You're having lots of little mini rests. And the example of the hill climbing shows you when, it's constant pressure up the hill. And if you took a rest, your bike will slow down and the bunch will leave you. Just like it would as in a running race on a flat course or whatever the example is. As a runner, if you slow down fractionally, the pack of runners you're running with will just leave you. Does that make sense, the difference between the two?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I guess the reason I bring it up is because for me, I feel like it gives you a bit of a mental edge when you are riding, not a hill effort like you're saying, but when you're cycling and even just holding an effort over some undulations, or in a triathlon setting, holding that sub-threshold effort, it gives you that mental edge to know that you can stick in there, because mentally you just have to hang on a little bit. You're going to get a little bit of respite, you're going to get a little bit of rest, and you can, it allows you to push on that a little bit further. Whereas I know mentally with running, once you start fading with your pace, you really can't do much about it. You just start, it's just a horrible feeling. And so I guess I would ask, I know that you want people to always be conservative in all aspects, especially in a time trial setting or a triathlon setting where you do not want to be fading no matter what the leg, swim, bike, or run. But could you say it's more important to be conservative in the run compared to the bike?
Yeah, just before I answer that question, the example I want to give to what we were talking about, and you've jumped from from a lot of running in your whole 28 years of existence. It's been mainly about running, and all of a sudden you've jumped onto the bike. And as a runner, all runners develop this massive engine that they can sustain threshold because that's what they do. In all sports, you will be good at what you practice. And in running, you practice running at threshold pretty much the majority of the time. All the races are a threshold race, whether it's a 5K, a 10K, or a marathon. There's hardly any times when you're surging and relaxing and surging and relaxing. That does come into tactics a little bit in the elite level, but the majority of time in a running race, you run from A to B as fast as you can. And when runners transfer to bike riding, they are incredibly good at holding power for long periods of time. And they're normally good bike riders because they've got a great engine from all of that running. And then in a bike race, all of a sudden they're getting periods where they rest. So they recover so quick compared to bike riders. And then they can go again. And look, people who've been on our Zwift rides on a Thursday night or have witnessed you jumping on Zwift doing a couple of races from not doing any races, and you being able to go with our best riders because you're getting, A, you've got a great engine, but B, you're getting little rests that enable you to know, and because you're very clever at tactics already because you've listened to tactics for the last 25 years about how to do things. That last Thursday night race was, this, for example, there's 3 hills. You just have to hang on those 3 hills and you'll get a good opportunity to sprint at the end. You executed that way better than I did. And that's an example of understanding the tactics of racing, using your ability properly.
I don't want to talk about myself, but I will say that in terms of conserving, I've listened to you say the word conserve. I would say, I don't know, tens of thousands of times throughout my whole life, especially on these podcasts. And I will say that I think I over-conserve in cycling because I've heard you say it so much. And I think I was able to perform well in those races because I was hyper-conservative and I really wasn't helping the group out very much because I was trying to over-conserve, and so it allowed me to be fresher. But yeah, I guess, is that still, that part 2 of the question,
Yep.
Is that still accurate that you can be less conservative on the bike compared to running, especially for triathletes?
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to give that example before I answered the question, because that relates exactly to the question. So if you're a person with a great engine, you can take way more risks because you know that no matter what happens, you're going to get a little recovery, or you can force a little recovery by sitting in on the wheel and making someone else do the work, and then you're going to be back to 100% again within 10 seconds or 20 or 30 seconds to go again. So you can be, the question you're saying is you've been taught to be conservative and measure your effort. Yes, you can be more risk taker as a bike rider compared to a runner. And that's one of the things that, as triathletes, it's just not worth it. You should not be doing that. You should be measuring your effort from start to finish. And the more times you spike your efforts, the more it's going to hurt you when you come to run. Because running, if you've got any levels of fatigue, it's going to be the most excruciating experience at the end of a triathlon. Whereas, just a pure bike riding, you've got so much more opportunity to take risks because coming from that background, and that's one of the things why we talk about having the complete rider, where he's got threshold, he's got sprint, he's got endurance, he's got all these things to his armory that he can use. He's got good recovery. And if you're just a sit-on sprinter, you are just relying on one thing happening every race. And that's a really narrow way to race and very unenjoyable because you're just relying on the brake's always being brought back, and you have no say in the race except for the last 100 metres. And it's fantastic when you win. The rest of the field hate you, but you just want to have more fun as a bike rider than just that. So the point is to bring all of the components that require in a bike race, bring that in your training, and you will have so much more fun in races. And you're the example of someone coming with a huge engine. We have plenty of real, Julian Painter is a great an Olympian who's a really good bike rider, but was a 5K runner at Olympic level, and he's got this massive engine, and that enables him to be such a good bike rider because he can take huge risks knowing that he'll get a recovery period and he'll be ready to go again when the next attack happens. And that's such a weapon to have as a bike rider. So yes, to answer the question, you should be taking more risks because there's so many opportunities for you to recover in a bike race.
And in terms of being a more complete athlete, you often speak about how riding can complement your running and running can complement your riding, vice versa. But if you are just a cyclist, and this applies to triathletes as well, how do you actually become that more complete athlete, that more complete person who can hold threshold, who can do over efforts and then be able to recover, who can build that massive engine? How do you actually achieve that?
Yeah, well, you need a program that's going to allow you to do some of those sessions. And, there's two things here. You can be born physiologically advanced, so your VO2 can, the elite riders of the world, or, cross-country skiers, or the elite in anything, you would say the majority of them are above 85 to 90. So if I'm a VO2 of 44 and I'm competing against someone with 85, no matter what training I do, I'm going to be up against it if it comes down to who's going to sustain threshold effort, whether it's bike riding, whether it's running, or whether it's cross-country skiing or swimming. I'm going to be up against it because they're just naturally got better engines. Does that mean I don't try? Of course not. Tactics come into it, especially in bike riding. The person who's the best bike rider, should win the race, but it doesn't always happen. As a runner, the person who's the best runner normally would win the race because tactics aren't as important. But you can still train the engine. You can get the most out of yourself, and areas where you're weak, that's the areas you need to concentrate on. And if you don't have an engine, you can spend time, but it is going to take time. It's not going to happen in a 4-week block. It could possibly take 4 years to build your engine. And people might laugh at that, but that's a realistic appraisal of someone who's got no threshold ability. It just doesn't happen overnight. And I've got countless examples of athletes who we've coached who were absolute crap at time trialing, and that's a threshold event on a bike. And they're weapons as a time trialist now, but it took 4 or 5 years to get them there, and patience and consistency and all the things we talk about. So yeah, to answer that question, it's definitely an advantage to have some sort of genealogy that's going to give you that head start, but it doesn't mean that they're the only ones who are going to win races.
So one question that you've been getting a lot of recently is, kind of based on that, it's your genealogy kind of impacts your limit, but also the programming that you do and then how long you stick to it will impact where you can get to and what your ceiling is. You get a lot of people asking you, Gerard, where's my ceiling? Where can I get to? You get a lot of questions, coach, where can you get me to? And how do you go about answering that? I know it depends on the person, but what's the process you go through about considering how long someone wants to attempt it for? If they want to be an endurance athlete, like you said, do you say to them it's going to be 4 years? I imagine that for a lot of people, they're thinking much more short-term goals. I want to get to this wattage by 3 months' time, or I have this race goal and I want to run this time. But, should you be picking goals based on a wattage? I want to get to 250 watts or for 2 hours, or I want to get to sub 12-hour Ironman. Which factors should you be thinking about? How long should you be thinking about them? And one last point on that is, I think a lot of people get deterred from a goal when it's going to take too long. And like you said before, 4 years might sound too ridiculous. But is a fair point on that. If a goal is only going to take you a year and then you're done with it, it could be kind of boring because you invest all this time and money into a bike, especially in cycling and triathlon. If you achieve your goal in the first year, then you'd have nothing to do for the next 5 to 10 years. So you probably want to span out your goals a little bit over a longer period of time, wouldn't you?
Yeah, look, there's such a loaded question, George. I don't even know where to begin. But
Sorry, yeah.
but I think the process is something that people should have as a goal. If you're not going to be, I'm a big goal setter, and I want people to have goals, and I believe that goal setting is the key to anything that you do in life. Is if you haven't got a purpose to get up for, you're not going to get up. And so that's the main driver. But there's climbing Everest goals, and there's little goals along the way. You know, climbing your local hill sort of thing. So stepping stones along the way. But you've got to love the process, and I think for me, if someone's coming to me and they're just wanting a short-term outcome, I've got to say it's not as inspiring to me as someone who's got big goals that might take a long time, and that's a journey then. So we're on a journey, and that's exciting to me because no matter what level you start at, there you can progress, and we've said this a lot. Thousands of athletes who come with a level, who want to go to that level, and it might take that particular person A twice as long as person B with the same goal because of their genealogy. But the person who's willing to stick at it will eventually succeed. But they can't be goals that are unrealistic. You know, I can't say to some 55-year-old who says he wants to ride at 6.2 watts per kilo, that's his goal. Well, that's just not going to happen. You know, unless he's got a VO2 of 90 still at age 55. So that's an example of that's just an unrealistic goal. So stepping stones along the way and the journey is the thing that I think should be the emphasis. That, you know, if you've got a passion to get somewhere, you should love the process and the journey about achieving it, and that's what should be inspiring you to make you a better athlete. And if someone's not improving in our group, I've just had some conversations already this week about that. I will do everything I can to find out what is going wrong. What are we missing here? Because you know, every session you do for a different athlete is not going to get the same result. So we've got to find what works for you. So you, Jordan, you know, we know you've got an engine, but you know, can you replicate, you know, repeated sprints at 1200 watts? No, you can't, because you're not trained in that yet. But that's a goal for you to be as good at the end as you are throughout the race. And, you know, that's a really simple thing that we can change by giving you some practice sessions when you're sprinting tired. You know, and we do that in training. You know, we just don't sprint fresh, because in races that doesn't happen. So you need to practice things like that. So they're just examples of how each athlete can progress through their journey, but they're going to have, you know, roadblocks along the way, and that's where I'm passionate about finding out what do we need to change here. What's stopping athlete A from getting to where he wants to go? And I'm not saying you know, he wants it quickly. It's just not improving. You know, that what we're doing with him is not helping, and they're staying the same, which, by the way, is what happens to 95% of triathletes and cyclists day in, day out. I mean, we're quite happy with that. But the people who come to us, they come to us because they want to improve. And, you know, that's our success, is not getting people to win things, although that's a bonus, but just to improve themselves and show that they can go from 250 watts to 275. But the point I'm making is you have to be on board with the journey and the process, and have little mini goals along the journey for your big goal. So that's kind of how I would answer that question.
Yeah, definitely. Would you encourage people to have, well, are you really pushing athletes to have both short-term and longer-term goals at the same time and tell you what they are? You know, do you really want athletes to have a short-term 6-month goal, but then say to you, but I also want to be here in 3 years?
Yeah, definitely. And look, most of the goals that athletes come to us are short term anyway. Um, someone will say, I want to do Amy's Grand Fondo, I want to do 3 peaks, or as a triathlete, I want to do the first Olympic distance of the season or half Ironman, or I want to do an Ironman. And you and I know that people ask us to do an Ironman in 6 months, and some of them have never done one before. So that's a big goal with such a short time limit. So, I would always direct them to say, why don't you have a lot of little goals before that? Push your Ironman goal back another year and tick off some Olympic, and then tip off some 70.3s, so that you're actually getting some success along the journey, and you're getting experience in the execution of those events. And, over the weekend, we just did a double brick session where, guys really texted me saying, far out, that was so valuable, because it just gave me an idea of where my power numbers are for that, and where I could run pace off the bike, and by doing that in a training session that was really scripted as a race, your own personal race, preparation before the event, getting your gear ready, your nutrition, thinking about the pace and the power you're going to ride at, and trying to do it. And then at the end going, well, did I do it? Did I set the race plan properly? All of that was just so valuable. And they're little stepping stone goals along the journey, so that when it comes to the real thing, the A day, you're pretty confident that you'll execute and get the result you want. So that's kind of the way I look at it. And if I'm not enjoying the process or the journey, I definitely don't get the results. And that's happened to me many times, where I've just gone through the motions, as they say, instead of being an active participant. There's two differences there. You use the criterium race. You can just be part of the bunch, rolling around an hour on a Thursday night, or you can be a player where you're dictating things, you're attacking, you're following, you're jumping. 10% of the people are dictating the race, and 90% are followers. Which one do you want to be? So that's how you should be scheduling your goals and your mini goals, and the journey and the process. That's how I think that's how it should be for most athletes. And if they get that right, then I'm sure they will enjoy the experience of being just a recreational runner or swimmer or triathlete or rider, and really get the most out of themselves and their sport, and it will be enjoyable. And that takes away that negativity all the time of, I'm not improving, and things aren't going well. And this year's a classic example for that, with so many things being against everybody in the world. But you've seen people stand up and go, no, I'm going to plan something that I've got control of, which is my training. There may not be any races, but I'm going to control the controllables. And boy, our weekend experience where we did some trials outdoors for the first time was incredible to see how well. I think we had on one particular course 100% improvement on every rider who went into the time trial. They beat their previous time, which was in the middle of lockdown. And this is the first time they've been out on the road for majority of them for sometimes 8-10 weeks. And it was a real classic example of people taking control of their own destiny.
So to finish off, do you personally have 3+ year goals, 4-year goals, for where you're going to be in 3, 4, 5 years with your cycling performances?
Yeah, look, definitely my goal is to stay fit and healthy. That is the number one goal that I have. And I was actually thinking about the other day. It's funny you asked that question, because we didn't discuss this. A question without notice, which I love, because every question you can have, and I might not know the answer, but for me, I was thinking about this the other day, and there's a lot of things that I've ticked off that I'm really satisfied with in what I've done with my riding and triathlon and running and all those things. But definitely my number one goal is to stay healthy and fit, because I've seen, my brother's going through incredible illness at the moment, and you just really realize how valuable every moment you've got when you're healthy is. And my goal is to stay in that shape that I can have a full and functioning life. And I just had a new granddaughter born, and you want to be around for those things. So my mental approach to that is, it sounds quite general to be healthy and fit, but but I'm not going to get out of bed because I want to be healthy and fit to go training. I definitely put races in front of myself, which will give me the health and fitness I want, but it makes me get out of bed. And without those goals, I'm more than likely to go, oh, I don't feel like it today at 6 o'clock when the alarm goes off, or 5:30. And I'm more than likely going to be less consistent. So my number one goal has always been lately to really look after my health and fitness. And the only way I can do that for myself is to put little competitive events where I detest losing more than I care to like. So it really is a driver for me to get the ultimate goal, which is to stay healthy.
That's a really good way to finish. And I think that's a really important question that we could all ask ourselves, either in the short term and thinking about the long term. You know, what's going to get you out of bed in the short term and what's going to get you out of the bed in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. That's a really good way to finish. I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. And we'll see you on the podcast next week.